Thank you for watching Amir Shakir 5858. I am Amir Budnam. I am thankful to all news resources and my team. Following news have been reported by American, European, Asian, African, Australian channels and also by news agencies AFP, AP and Reuters. Now the headlines. New COVID variant, bird flu and hand and mouth disease in America has been detected. Young people are trying to stay healthy in America. Asian Americans' contribution to American society. In Gaza, Palestinians are again fleeing from Rafah after Israeli new orders. Israeli bomb killed 19 people yesterday. Russian forces are taking more area in Kharkiv area in new offensive. 200,000 people fleeing due to this Russian action. Afghanistan is under flood. Brazil is also facing flood. Kenya is also facing heavy flood. Due to solar storm, dazzling colors appear on the sky in different areas of the world. Now the news in detail.
Tonight, Israel orders civilians in the Gaza city of Rafah to get out. The city, once of refuge from war, now on its front lines. Hundreds of thousands with nowhere to flee.
I'm Rami Inocencio in Jerusalem. Ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas are over for now, and Hamas claims another hostage is dead.
Plus, new reaction as a U.S. report takes aim at Israel's use of American weapons. As campus protests flare again from Virginia to California. Also tonight, money matters. A federal judge's ruling could impact your next credit card bill, while mortgage rates reverse course. Plus, dazzling display. A rare solar storm lights up the sky in the north and south. Why the show's not over yet. Historic flyover. Dozens of aircraft wing it across the nation's most restricted airspace. And later, a salute to the top of the mark. San Francisco's legendary stop for U.S. service members and veterans celebrates 85 years.
We are very excited. We finally made it to 85.
This is the CBS Weekend News from Washington with Adriana Diaz.
Good evening, I'm Robert Costa, in for Adriana. Nationwide protests over the war in Gaza and President Biden's approach have inflamed dozens of colleges and universities, stoked tensions in the Democratic Party, and created new challenges for his re-election. Today, more pro-Palestinian protests as dozens of graduating students walked out of their commencement at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond. Across the country, at the University of California at Berkeley, commencement began peacefully, but was disrupted by hundreds of protesters, most of them graduates in cap and gown. And tonight in Gaza, some 300,000 Palestinians in the city of Rafah are being forced to flee once again as the Israeli military prepares to target Hamas. CBS's Rami Inocencio in Jerusalem leads us off.
Good evening. Israel's war cabinet has greenlit a new military advance on Gaza's southernmost city. Thousands of people in Rafah are right now evacuating to the coast, on top of the more than 100,000 that fled in the past week. Ramping up, the exodus from Rafah. Gazans heeded Israel's newest warning sent by texts and flyers from the sky. You are in a dangerous combat area. The IDF is about to operate with great force. We're leaving because of our fear and because of coercion, said this woman. We're leaving for the unknown, and there are no safe areas at all. All the areas it says are safe are unsafe. More are overflowing further up the coast, like Abu Mohammed al-Radi and his family. We came from Rafah and found no place to stay, he said. There isn't enough space for all the people. There is not enough space to hold the displaced people. What's left in Rafah is eerie abandonment, even journalists wrapping up their final stories. At the city's biggest hospital, a quiet acceptance, more death is coming. Hamas is still fighting back, with missiles and with media. This new video praises snipers shooting Israeli soldiers. Israel's army released its own, troops advancing through Gazan homes. But tonight, Hamas also released this video, a 51-year-old British hostage. They claim he died after an Israeli strike. Tonight, more protests across the country and outside Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's house in Jerusalem. These protests have been happening for months. They're saying, bring the hostages home. Their blood is on the government's hands. Protests have swelled in recent weeks, calling for Netanyahu's ouster and for that ceasefire with Hamas. Until then, the desperate in Gaza are evacuating as fast as they can. And Hamas says ceasefire talks are back at square one, blaming Israel for rejecting its proposal last week. And Robert, the U.S. is trying to keep Israel and Hamas talking, if only virtually, to keep ceasefire hopes alive.
Rami Inocencio in Jerusalem, thanks. Here in Washington, the Biden administration has been working urgently for weeks to stave off a full-scale Israeli invasion of Rafah. At the same time, it's walking a diplomatic tightrope after releasing a critical report on Israeli use of American weapons in the conflict. CBS's Natalie Brand is at the White House with the latest.
Good evening, Robert. This nearly 50-page report delivered to Congress is critical of Israel, but also inconclusive, adding to the frustration from the right and left.
Republicans accuse the report of providing political cover to the president with his supporters. Democrats say it ducks the critical question at hand, after the State Department said given Israel's significant reliance on U.S.-made defense articles, it's reasonable to assess that weapons may have been used by Israel's military in instances, quote, inconsistent with international law, but says it doesn't have complete information to verify.
It sends a muddled message because it's inconclusive.
The document comes the same week the president warned Israel that the U.S. will not supply offensive weapons for a large-scale military operation in Rafah. Already, the White House has paused the shipment of 3,500 bombs, including 2,000-pound aerial weapons. The White House is worried about the impact they could have in dense urban settings.
If Israel is serious about doing a precise targeted counterterrorism operation that can take out Hamas battalions but not cause undue civilian harm, you really don't need munitions of that size anyway.
But the administration's move has intensified divisions on Capitol Hill.
I think the president's doing the right thing. This is terrible policy, and it's bad for the United States.
Responding to Republican criticism, the White House says the president is still standing with Israel as they fight Hamas, but also making clear how Israel defends itself matters. The administration saying it does not want to see any more civilians killed. Robert?
Natalie Brand, thanks. Now to a setback for the Biden administration in court. A federal judge in Texas has blocked a plan to try and limit credit card late fees. The cap was supposed to go in effect next week. CBS's Elise Preston is on the Money Watch tonight. Elise?
Robert, credit card users looking for relief from late fees won't get it anytime soon after a federal judge sided with banks and businesses to freeze the rule from going into effect.
The Biden administration's rule to cap late fees for credit card payments at $8 is now temporarily on hold. A federal judge in Texas granted an injunction at the request of business and banking organizations. Late fees on bills generate an estimated $10 billion annually for credit card companies. The average penalty is a whopping $32 a month. This case could go all the way to the Supreme Court. Mortgage rates fell for the first time in 5 weeks. The average rate for a 30-year fixed loan is at 7.09%, down from 7.22 last week. Still, not enough for some homeowners.
Why sell and pay higher interest on a new home?
Many house hunters are also sitting on the sidelines due to higher prices and low inventory.
Hello, I have someone?
Some consumers are fed up with fast food. Several chains, including McDonald's and Starbucks, are seeing a drop in sales as their prices climb higher. McDonald's prices doubled since 2014, according to Finance Buzz, while Starbucks lovers are shelling out nearly 40% more compared to a decade ago.
Labor costs are partly driving higher prices at the nation's most popular fast food joints. Nearly half of states raised minimum wage for fast food workers this year. Robert?
Elise Preston, thank you. Now to the huge solar storm hitting the Earth's atmosphere. It's millions of miles away, but the eruptions on the sun are bringing the northern lights to regions that rarely see them all over the world. But if you miss this magical phenomena, you might get lucky tonight. CBS's Michael George in New York has his eyes on the sky. Michael.
Well, Robert, quite a show last night, and it's not over yet. But as beautiful as the northern lights are, with a solar storm this large, it has the power to affect things here on Earth, from the power grid to the GPS on your phone.
Oh my God, it was fast.
Breathtaking, otherworldly images from Canada, Ukraine, Switzerland, and England. And across much of the U.S., people witness streaks of pink and purple and green as far south as Florida.
Wow.
Sean Dahl, senior space weather forecaster for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, explains what we're seeing in the skies.
The aurora is when we get energized particles that have left the sun in more quantities than usual, and they interact with Earth's magnetic barrier.
Astrophysicist Noor Rawafi says this is the biggest geomagnetic storm in more than 20 years.
This one is pretty large. I think it's pretty extreme.
It's so large, it can temporarily disrupt satellites we rely on for communication and navigation, like GPS. Elon Musk's Starlink satellites are reporting degraded service.
Most of us have GPS on our phones. Is that something that could potentially be disrupted?
Yes, it could, because most of our phones are single-frequency GPS systems.
Aurora Borealis can even impact our power grid and cause blackouts, but utility companies took precautions.
It seems this time around certain steps were taken.
Now, if you didn't get a chance to see Aurora last night, you still have one more shot tonight. Now, it is weather dependent, but experts say your best shot is between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Robert?
Michael, thank you. Today, the woman who started the campaign that led to the creation of Juneteenth as a federal holiday was honored at Southern Methodist University. Opal Lee was awarded an honorary doctorate recognizing her life of activism. Juneteenth marks the day when 2,000 Union troops arrived in Galveston Bay, Texas, to announce to the more than 250,000 enslaved black people in the state that they were finally free. Today, the presidential campaign carried on as former President Trump takes a break from his criminal trial to hit the shore, rallying thousands of supporters gathered in Wildwood, New Jersey. As for the Biden campaign, it has recently been working to rally its core voters too. CBS's Torian Small reports on how Ashley are enthusiastic.
Black voters helped swing Georgia for Joe Biden in 2020, but their support appears to be softening.
I mean, I guess it's the best we got.
I think my vote's the same, but it's less enthusiastic. Oh, actually, letting people know about the election coming up.
And grassroots organizers are seeing signs black men are slow to return to his fold.
The young black men are more likely to say that they will vote for Trump. But what I am most concerned about this year is that about 30% were still undecided at the time of our poll.
Now 6 months out, the Biden campaign is retooling its messaging to those unenthused voters.
That's why we're running organizing pilots last year in cities like Milwaukee targeted directly towards black men. We're now at a moment in time right now in April where we're scaling up those operations in all of our battleground states.
Republicans are focused on peeling black men away from Biden's base just without the infrastructure it had in previous cycles. For example, this now shuttered office space right outside Atlanta used to be the RNC's Black American Community Center. Without it, they're leaning on local conservative groups like the Georgia Black Republican Council for outreach.
We've done Black conservative summits, we've done barbershop political forums, we bring government to the people in the local communities where they can ask direct questions and get direct answers.
Their pitch? Mentorship from generations of Republican black men without the national party.
Do you think Republicans are doing enough outreach in black communities?
We can do a better job. We have an opportunity to get a message out, and we're doing everything that we can to take advantage of that opportunity.
Biden is still expected to pick up the majority of votes from black men in the Peach State, but with fewer than 12,000 votes here making the difference in 2020, his bid can't afford too many of them staying home in November. Torian Small, CBS News, Atlanta.
Straight ahead on the CBS Weekend News, For the Birds, how this Florida ER is helping victims of the state's overcrowding. Eurovision final. After the protest, the spectacle takes over with millions watching worldwide. Later, landmark celebration. We visit the top of the mark.
Yango.
In always growing Florida, wildlife native to the state is getting hurt by humans who mostly are not. CBS's Christian Benavidez in Miami introduces us to an organization that's trying to bring things back into balance.
We really need to make sure that he can paddle appropriately with both feet.
At the Pelican Harbor Seabird Station in Miami, Renata Schneider is the emergency veterinarian on duty.
We're doing surgeries, we're doing EKG monitoring on our patients, we're using appropriate pain medications, we're cautiously using antibiotics.
Founded in 1980, the Seabird Station functions as an ER for local wildlife.
Is it an injured animal?
Lately, it's gotten busier.
We had our highest numbers in 2020, 2021. This year has been a very busy year. I don't know if we're going to break those numbers.
Staff here says South Florida has an invasive species problem, a growing human population that presents challenges to the native animals. Yorita Acosta is in charge of rehabilitation. She's worked here for 12 years.
With more people, more buildings going up, we see a lot more hit by cars or birds flying into windows or buildings.
Then there's the seabirds with fish hook line injuries or that have swallowed plastic waste.
The pelicans in this case have life-altering injuries, including this guy, that makes them ineligible for release, so the harbor station cares for them.
They become permanent residents at the Wildlife Center, so-called ambassadors, a public face to the Seabird Station during what Schneider says is a critical time.
South Florida is in trouble right now. We keep building, we keep destroying habitat. Without our work, how are these pelicans and gulls supposed to continue to thrive?
For most of the birds that get treated, this is the goal. After 55 days of treatment for botulism and an eye infection, this brown pelican was successfully released back into the wild.
Some people will make the argument, well, they would just die and leave them be in the wild. However, we don't buy into that. Most of the injuries that we see are caused by us. We have to correct the balance.
A balancing act to help us coexist responsibly with native wildlife. Christian Benavidez, CBS News, Miami.
Still ahead on the CBS Weekend News, why vintage planes today fill the secure skies above Washington, D.C. It's been 50 years since Waterloo shot ABBA to superstardom after winning the Eurovision Song Contest. Tonight, this year's competition is being held in Sweden, but overshadowed by the war in Gaza. The young Israeli singer is among the favorites to win, but her participation has drawn loud protests to the Swedish city where it's taking place. Competitors from 24 nations are performing, a spectacle watched by an estimated 180 million viewers worldwide. Here in Washington, D.C. today, the heavily guarded skies above the nation's capital were filled with vintage planes. Nearly 60 of them, some from as early as 1939, flew above the Potomac River in a celebration of 85 years of general aviation in the United States. It's the first time since 9/11 that general aviation planes have been allowed to fly over the National Mall. 11 federal agencies had to give their approval. Next on the CBS Weekend News, landmark celebration. Why this may be the best place to enjoy the beauty of the city by the bay. Tonight, a San Francisco landmark is celebrating 85 years of service and sweeping views of one of the country's most beautiful cities. In 1944, Time magazine wrote that up to 30,000 soldiers and sailors came up the elevator every month for a final drink on American soil before shipping out to war. In our weekend journal, CBS's Juliette Goodrich takes us to the top of the mark.
High atop Nob Hill, inside the Mark Hopkins Hotel, take the elevator all the way up, and on this night only, you'll travel back in time. 85 years?
Yes, we are very excited. We finally made it to 85, starting way back in May of 1939.
The Top of the Mark, the Bay Area's most famous cocktail lounge, opened 85 years ago. It was an instant sensation. During the Second World War, the Top of the Mark was a favorite spot for Pacific-bound military to share a toast before shipping out. As the warships left, wives and sweethearts gathered at this very corner, known as the Weeper's Window.
And they would watch as they shipped out, and of course there would be some weeping, there would be some tissues, a very emotional time.
Wow. It was also here that the tradition known as the Squadron Bottle began. Servicemen buy and leave a bottle with a bartender, so the next member from the squadron could enjoy a free drink. Finish the bottle, you leave a new one behind.
The Squadron Bottle embodies and represents those bonds, that teamwork, that camaraderie that was forged at sea, as were the case.
Cheers to 75 years. Finally, on top of the Top of the Mark, a bit of KPIX history. 75 years ago, KPIX began broadcasting from the attic above the famous bar, becoming the first TV station in Northern California. Cheers. Juliette Goodrich, CBS News, San Francisco.
That's the CBS Weekend News for this Saturday. First thing tomorrow, CBS Sunday Morning. That is Face the Nation. Margaret Brennan's guests include Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Reporting from Washington, I'm Rob.
New COVID variants and a bird flu outbreak in cows, how concerned should we be? Then why being around younger people is helping some older Americans stay healthier and happier.
When we get to see the little ones, it's very heartening. It makes us all feel younger again.
And the hidden history of a photographer who captured the daily lives, struggles, and contributions of Asian Americans.
Tourists like you. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm John Yang. In Gaza, tens of thousands of Palestinians are being forced to flee again. The Israeli military has issued new and expanded evacuation orders amid signs that it's preparing to move into densely populated central Rafah. About a third of Rafah has been evacuated. That's more than 300,000 people in all. Many of them have already been moving several times in the past 7 months as they fled Israeli air bombardment. This time they're being told to go to what the Israeli military is calling an expanded humanitarian area along the Mediterranean coast north of Rafah. The UN warns that a full-scale Rafah invasion would further cripple humanitarian deliveries of much-needed food, water, and fuel. Russian forces have taken control of 5 more villages outside Kharkiv as they press a renewed offensive in Ukraine's northeast. The region's governor says Russian artillery and airstrikes are pummeling more than 30 villages. The capture of that territory expands the Russian buffer zone along the border. Ukrainian authorities say nearly 2,000 civilians have fled the fierce fighting. The Russian push comes as Ukraine waits for promised Western ammunition and weapons to reach the front line. Heavy rains have triggered deadly flash floods on 3 continents. In northern Afghanistan, the UN says more than 300 people have died in the past few weeks. More than 1,000 homes have been destroyed, swamped in mud. In southern Brazil, new storms battered a region already reeling from more than a week of deadly floods. At least 136 people have died. And in Kenya, floods and mudslides have swept away people and homes. At least 267 people are dead there. Hundreds of thousands of people in both countries are now displaced. And unusually strong storms on the sun are producing brilliant displays in the night skies here on Earth. The splashes of dazzling colors known as the Northern Lights are being seen as far south as the Florida Keys, across the west coast from Seattle to Southern California, and in Europe from the United Kingdom to Spain. Scientists say we're in a period of peak solar activity. A large number of explosions called solar flares and coronal mass ejections are sending energized particles into space. When those particles hit Earth's atmosphere and magnetic field, a vivid, colorful glow is produced. The spectacle's drawing people out into the night to see it and photograph it. NOAA's Science Space Weather Prediction Center issued a rare severe geomagnetic storm warning, saying power grids, GPS, and high-frequency radio transmissions could be affected. Sightings of the Northern Lights may be possible through the weekend and into next week. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, how living and working around young people is keeping older Americans happier and healthier, and the legacy of a photographer who chronicled the daily lives of Asian Americans.
This is PBS News Weekend from WETA Studios in Washington, home of the PBS News Hour, weeknights on PBS.
4 years after the start of the pandemic, hospitalizations for COVID are at an all-time low. But there are new variants, and now bird flu is in the headlines. It's been found in at least 36 dairy herds across 9 states. But so far this year, there's only been 1 confirmed human case. So how concerned should we be about all of this? Caitlin Gentilina writes the popular newsletter, Your Local Epidemiologist, and she was just named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in health. So Caitlin, how concerned...
On this Saturday night, wildfire emergency. Thousands evacuated, vital services disrupted as forest fires in Western Canada spread.
It blew up to 80 hectares in a couple hours.
How close they are to communities. Nowhere safe. As Gazans are forced to relocate. How food and fuel could run out tomorrow. Plus, the violent clashes on Canadian campus encampments. Cities submerged. The race against time for rescuers in Brazil, and the heartwarming efforts to save pets amidst the chaos. And the Northern Lights come south. Your chances of seeing the spectacular light show tonight.
Global National with RNSO.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. It may be early in the season, but wildfires are already threatening communities in Canada's west and north. Thousands of people have been forced to evacuate, and many more are preparing to do the same thing. Canada's wildfire situation is currently centered in northern British Columbia and northern Alberta. The 2 provinces are battling more than 160 wildfires combined, but it's 2 fires of note that are causing the most concern right now. A growing wildfire that doubled in size overnight near Fort Nelson, BC, and an out-of-control blaze near Fort McMurray, Alberta. We begin tonight with Global's Alyssa Thibault, who's following this developing story for us from British Columbia. Alyssa, what is the latest from officials?
Well, right now, fire officials can't say when residents of Fort Nelson and Fort Nelson First Nation will be able to return home. Conditions are still too dangerous. Now, this fire started around 6:30 Friday night. It spread very quickly. An evacuation order was issued just a couple of hours later. The spectacular Northern Lights dancing above a raging fire, burning dangerously close to homes, causing an evacuation order to be issued for Fort Nelson and the Fort Nelson First Nation Friday night.
I didn't take it seriously at first because I've never been in a situation like that before. And then I didn't start taking it properly seriously, so I got the actual alarm go off my phone. And I then started crying, panicking.
You hear about these things on the news all the time. You think it's not going to happen to you, right? And when it does, it hits like a truck.
Residents were told to head south to a reception centre set up in Fort St. John.
I think we left around 8:30. We got here about 4 because of all the traffic. It was nuts.
It's pretty quiet here. I'm sure that the vast majority of people are out of the community safely.
The fire started by a tree falling onto power lines around 12 kilometres west of Fort Nelson. Strong winds meant it grew quickly and started moving toward the town, home to around 3,000 people.
We saw rank 4, rank 5 behavior, so that continuous handling in the canopies as well as fires spotting forward.
We felt the need to move the community as quickly as possible because this fire was growing so rapidly.
The BC Wildfire Service says easing conditions through Saturday have been helping, the biggest factor being winds calming down.
The bad is we've got a town full of smoke. The good is we have smoke because the wind is down and the smoke is settling right down in the valley here.
The smoke settling across much of Alberta and as far south as Edmonton. Environment Canada issuing a warning about poor air quality and reduced visibility, saying it could last into Tuesday. And officials in Alberta are also keeping a close eye on a fire burning south of Fort McMurray, which is said to have grown significantly in size today. An evacuation alert was put in place last night for the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo, which includes Fort Mac, and is home to some 68,000 people. Residents are reminded to keep essential items like documents and emergency kits ready should they have to evacuate on short notice. Farah.
An important tip, Elisa Tebow in Burnaby, BC. Thank you, Alyssa. The wildfires are also causing chaos in the north. Damage to fiber lines is being blamed for widespread telecommunications outages being reported in large parts of Yukon and the Northwest Territories. Cell phone, internet, and 911 services have all been impacted. Officials say they're working to get access to the damaged infrastructure, but they cannot provide an ETA on repairs at this time. Breaking news tonight, a fourth suspect has now been charged in the murder of BC Sikh leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar. BC's Integrated Homicide Investigation Team announced 22-year-old Amandeep Singh is being charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Singh, who is an Indian national, was already in custody for unrelated firearms charges in Ontario. He's accused of taking part in the shooting death of Nijjar in the parking lot of a Gurdwara last June. The three other suspects are also Indian nationals. To the Middle East now, where the situation is growing even more dire in the southern Gaza city of Rafah, as the threat of Israel's inevitable incursion looms over more than 1 million Palestinian refugees. Israeli military issued an evacuation order today as it intensified airstrikes. It also says around 300,000 Gazans have already left, but humanitarian groups warn that the designated evacuation zones are hardly any safer. And that's on top of the fact that aid organizations say food and fuel could run out in the next 24 hours. Mackenzie Gray has more on the situation, and first a warning, some of the images in his story are quite disturbing.
Explosions and smoke across Rafah, the last major area of Gaza the Israelis have not yet taken. But with a potential ground invasion looming, thousands in the southern city, including people in refugee camps, have been told to leave. Nearly 35,000 people have been killed in Gaza, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. The latest, this baby, killed when an Israeli airstrike hit his family's home. Attacks like those often carried out with arms supplied by the Americas, and a new report from the U.S. State Department finds that Israel potentially violated international humanitarian law in Gaza using weapons provided by the U.S., but there's no definitive conclusion.
The administration is doing this in order to continue the flow of arms, despite the specific restrictions that have been placed on shipments of, for example, 2,000-pound bombs, and that is why it has not come to any legally binding conclusions.
There is a definitive warning from the United Nations.
Food program in UNRWA will run out of food for distribution in the south by tomorrow. That means people will be left hungry with what has already been distributed.
Aid has been blocked from coming into Gaza at the Rafah border crossing after Israel recently took over one of the few links to the outside world, a concerning development for families of Israeli hostages.
Entering Rafah and expanding the operations there are both to hinder the hostages release negotiation and put the hostages' lives in grave danger.
That danger underscored today, with Hamas claiming a British-Israeli hostage died in captivity after an Israeli airstrike. Laura?
Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa for us. Thank you, Mackenzie. There's been another police crackdown on another encampment at a Canadian university protesting Israel's war in Gaza. Social media video shows Edmonton police early today violently clashing with protesters as they cleared an encampment at the University of Alberta, which began on Thursday. A statement by the university's president says the group did not comply with the campus protest policies and put the university community's safety at risk. Police were then called to enforce a trespass violation. The statement also says most protesters peacefully dispersed after a third trespass notice was issued, but protest organizers disputed that claim on social media, saying they were violently removed and 4 people were arrested. Today's incident in Edmonton follows a similar clash at the University of Calgary's campus this week. And with the rise of similar encampments across North American universities, there are concerns over the police response. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stevenson spoke with the Diversity, Inclusion and Persons with Disabilities Minister, Kamal Kara, about the protests. Here's some of what she had to say.
In Calgary, the university and the police felt that protest crossed the line and they called the police in to clear it. Do you think that should be happening on other universities?
Look, I know every situation is different, and I know local authorities are very much engaged in their jurisdictions in that matter, right? I think it's important to recognize that in Canada, we do have a charter that guarantees people's right to peacefully protest and express their views, but that should not cross the line into hate and intimidation. I think rightfully so, it's also just important that we not, we don't make perceptions and about a certain community based on actions of few.
And you can watch more Mercedes' conversation with Minister Kara tomorrow morning on the West Block right here on Global. The crisis in Gaza has also overshadowed one of the world's biggest international singing contests as the Eurovision competition had its grand final tonight. Activist Greta Thunberg was arrested after joining thousands of pro-Palestinian demonstrators gathered in this year's Swedish host city ahead of the event, calling for a ceasefire in Gaza and for organizers to remove Israel's contestant. The contest also faced another controversy. Hours before the final, organizers disqualified fan favorite Dutch contestant Joost Klein. Police are investigating him after a complaint by a female production crew member over a backstage incident. Flash floods have killed more than 300 people in Afghanistan and destroyed over 1,000 homes. Torrents of water swept through valleys in northern Afghanistan, destroying several villages. Roads and power lines were also destroyed. Several floods have hit Afghanistan this spring during periods of unusually heavy seasonal rain. And in southern Brazil, devastating floods may be getting even worse. Up to 150 millimeters of rain is forecast for this weekend. Heavy rains were falling in Brazil's southernmost state today, where the damage from flooding is already immense. At least 136 people have died, with 125 others missing. According to the government, more than 400,000 people have been displaced. And as Mike Armstrong reports, it's been a week of rescues and also of tears.
The scale is hard to believe. Close to 2 million people have been affected by Brazil's historic flooding. Hundreds of thousands are in shelters, with some cities completely underwater. Even in cities where levels didn't go as high, important services like water, sewage, electricity, or communications have been knocked out. About 6,000 people are sheltered in this university, struggling to sleep with the noise and heat and the memories. This woman is in the shelter with her grandchildren. She was rescued by helicopter. It was the most difficult day of our lives, she says. It was horrible. The government has said the amount of destruction will only be known when the water recedes. The country's southernmost state expects to need $5 billion for rebuilding. But for now, the focus has been on getting aid to people who need it and rescuing people who need to get to safety. It's very sad. I've never seen anything like it, this man says. I don't know what's going on. Now, southern Brazil wasn't used to extreme flooding, but that is changing. The storm that caused this disaster dropped in 10 days what would normally be 6 months' worth of rain. Well, it's the third time that's happened in a year. The driver of this tractor spent days moving people in his bucket. He says he's been living in the machine. It's become his home. He has nowhere to go anyway because his actual house is underwater. It has also been a difficult time for animals. When the team went out to rescue dogs, they brought back 60. When word of what they were doing got out, it spread. Within a few days, they had 2,500 dogs. This woman scoured shelters and found 2 of hers that had been missing. It's a joy, she says. Pets are all we have. I thought they had drowned. For the crews out searching, it has been grueling work and emotional. I want to help as much as possible, this rescuer says. It's a terrible feeling. Families have lost absolutely everything. One story that captivated many this week was a horse stranded on a tin roof. It was eventually rescued by firefighters and veterinarians. It was sedated and taken away by boat. The Brazilian First Lady shared a video of herself watching the rescue and then going to tell the president. It has been a week where Brazilians will take good news wherever they can find it. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
Ahead, hunger, thirst, and the threat of persecution. The malnutrition catastrophe and ethnic violence gripping Sudan. As the world's attention is focused on the Middle East and Ukraine, a catastrophic humanitarian crisis is unfolding in Sudan. In the western Darfur region of Sudan, the city of Al-Fashir is effectively surrounded by a paramilitary group and Arab militias. Aid agencies are warning of a major malnutrition crisis in the region, and there are fears thousands could be targets of ethnic violence as this conflict rages on. Redmond Shannon spoke to one man inside the besieged city.
Zamzam refugee camp near the city of El Fasher was set up 20 years ago for people fleeing ethnic violence in Sudan's Darfur region. The camp's residents now face renewed threats, hunger, thirst, and again, ethnic violence.
Obviously, peace needs to be happening, and honestly, at the moment, we don't see good signs. For the humanitarian aid specifically, we should have some access, whatever the situation is, and this is not also happening at the moment.
Doctors Without Borders and other aid agencies say a humanitarian disaster is tipping into catastrophe as the paramilitary rapid support forces effectively surround El Fasher. The forces were born out of Janjaweed militias, which were accused of crimes against humanity in Darfur 2 decades ago. Global News spoke with a civilian named Omer. We have changed his name to protect his identity.
People here in the city of El Fasher are very afraid of exacerbations of Islamic targeting, as happened in the city of El Geneina.
Last year, the Darfur city of El Geneina saw 10 to 15,000 people killed when the rapid support forces captured it, according to the United Nations. The force denies it has been involved in ethnic cleansing against non-Arabs during the year-long civil war.
The sick and the elderly are dying due to the lack of the medicines. The situation in the city of El Fasher is very complex. It's a major humanitarian disaster.
One of the things that, to me, captures just how invisible and horrific this war is that we don't have a credible death count. Some think it's at 150,000.
The United States Special Envoy for Sudan, Tom Perriello, says peace talks are planned for the coming weeks, but even he fears that may be too late for many of the people in El Fasher. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Next, underwater alphabet, how artificial intelligence and biology are unlocking the secrets of whale communication. Scientists working to decode the language of whales have opened a new window into oceanic communication. Intersecting computer science, artificial intelligence, and biology, they analyzed years of vocalizations by sperm whales in the Eastern Caribbean, and they found the clicking noises they make actually form a sort of phonetic alphabet to create what we think of as words and phrases. Neitha Garcha explains.
It may seem like random noise, but to scientists, those distinctive clicking sounds provide insight into how sperm whales communicate. The sounds, known as codas, are made by forcing air through muscles in their nose.
Our research shows that these codas have a complex internal structure with similarities to aspects of some other animal communication systems, and even some aspects of human language.
MIT professor Jacob Andrea says the sperm whales have 20-pound brains, the largest in the animal kingdom. They use the clicking noises like their own alphabet in a set of fixed patterns similar to Morse code.
Well, a big part of the larger project study effort here is to actually get that behavioral data paired with the communication data in order to answer these deeper questions about what it is that the whales are saying.
It seems that through this phonetic alphabet we can generate a lot of things, but we have no idea what they say.
Other researchers have tried to understand marine communication. In 2021, a humpback whale off Alaska responded to a recorded humpback signal in what researchers call the first communicative exchange between humans and whales in the humpback language. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. Experts say the key to understanding whale sounds could come from artificial intelligence.
The AI tools can help us to decipher what they're saying to each other.
MIT researchers say it'll take millions and millions of codas to have enough data to determine what the whales are saying. They agree AI will be key in helping to make sense of the sounds these sperm whales make.
We hope that this discovery will help us with whale conservation, as well as with a deeper understanding of our majestic neighbors of the undersea.
Neetha Garcha, Global News, Vancouver.
Missed last night's mesmerizing Northern Light spectacle? Coming up, the next celestial show on the horizon. If you were lucky, last night you saw one of the strongest and most spectacular shows ever. The Northern Lights lit up the night sky from North America all the way to Europe, thanks to an extreme solar storm. A dazzling celestial display.
So pretty. Wow.
A cosmic delight, leaving us Earthlings in awe.
Oh my God. I don't think us humans can make something as beautiful as the Northern Light.
Oh, and over here too.
Wow.
Earth slammed by the biggest geomagnetic storm in more than 2 decades.
Oh my God, it's not expecting.
And the clear skies above meant the viewing platform was picture perfect in many areas.
Yesterday was special.
A light show unlike any other. The kaleidoscope of colors seen right across Canada, from BC to southern Ontario and beyond.
We might get one like this only a few dozen times in a decade, so this is a pretty powerful storm.
It's not very usually that these polar lights are seen at lower latitudes, like Germany, and that means we had a very strong storm.
The stunning phenomenon, also known as the aurora borealis, occurs when electronically charged particles spewed from the sun crash down and collide with Earth's magnetic field.
So the different colours come from different constituents of the atmosphere, and so you normally get the greens and the reds from oxygen, and just occasionally you can see the pinks and the blues from the nitrogen, which requires a bit more energy to stimulate.
And for those who missed out,
so there are a couple more of these solar eruptions that are en route. They should arrive tonight.
Yep, there's still a chance.
Whenever these things are happening, they are reminders of what we should already be doing anyway, which is always looking up at the night sky, because it's always amazing up there.
So true. And that's Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Farah Nasser, and tonight's your Canada's Abbotsford, British Columbia. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and happy early Mother's Day. Good night.
Tonight, several developing stories as we come on the air. Israel orders evacuations in Rafah, hundreds of thousands now on the move. Donald Trump hits the campaign trail, and new reporting that he could be facing a huge tax bill, plus the massive solar storms bringing spectacular sights, but also some concern. First, the war in Gaza. Palestinians packing up after Israel orders new evacuations. More than 300,000 people have fled Rafah with a major offensive looming. Israeli protesters demanding the return of hostages and the growing rift between the U.S. and Israel. Marcus Moore reporting from Israel. Mary Alice Parks at the White House. Also tonight, Donald Trump trading the courtroom for the campaign trail. The former president has yet to pick a running mate. Tonight, he reveals who's not on his short list, and new reporting on his potential financial troubles, what he may owe the IRS. Widespread damage. More than 250 tornadoes over 16 days. Tallahassee, Florida hit especially hard by the storm. Florida State University campuses shut down. The South now bracing for heavy rain and flooding in the coming days. What this means for the Mother's Day forecast. A rare solar storm that pushed the Northern Lights south. A spectacular show in the sky, but raising concerns about the possible impact on satellites and the electric grid. Unrest on campus. More graduation ceremonies disrupted by pro-Palestinian demonstrations. Dozens arrested after protesters breached the gate at the home of the university president. Disturbing new video showing a police officer hitting and pinning a fleeing suspect who later died. That officer now suspended. The suspect's family demanding charges. A deadly shooting inside a movie theater. What we're learning about the investigation. Home prices soaring to record highs, but is a big change coming to the market. And the dog, once called unadoptable, now starring at the Westminster Dog Show.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us on this Saturday. I'm Wade Johnson. As we come on tonight, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are being ordered to leave the city of Rafah in southern Gaza. The Israeli army preparing to expand its ground operations amid a widening rift with the United States. In Rafah, families gathering their belongings, many of them displaced multiple times. The city had been a refuge for more than 1 million people fleeing the fighting from other parts of Gaza. President Biden standing by his warning that the U.S. will not provide offensive weapons that could be used in Rafah. Today, the death toll rising with more Palestinians killed in IDF strikes. We have team coverage tonight, and ABC's Marcus Moore leads us off from Israel.
Israeli forces tonight pushing deeper into the southern Gazan city of Rafah. 300,000 people now on the move amid new evacuation orders by the IDF as they position for an expanded ground operation. The IDF telling people currently in Rafah to evacuate to an expanded safe region roughly 4 miles away. But aid groups say that area too is already overpopulated. Mohammed Abu Al-Qas is a pediatrician in the Gaza Strip, and since the start of the war, he says he's moved his family several times at the direction of the IDF and is now moving once again. In a time of war, there's no place that is safe, he says. We expect strikes everywhere. At least 18 Palestinians were killed today in IDF air and artillery strikes on neighborhoods in East and West Rafah, according to a local hospital. The Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry saying since October 7th, the fighting has claimed the lives of nearly 35,000 Palestinians. All as the flow of supplies going into Gaza has slowed, according to aid groups. It has stopped almost completely in the south. And we were near the Kerem Shalom border crossing as demonstrators tried to stop aid trucks from passing through earlier this week.
This is where aid trucks come through every single day with crucial food and supplies for those starving in Gaza, but these demonstrators are stopping them right here.
However, aid groups say the humanitarian situation there is only getting worse as the war in Gaza enters a new phase.
And there is no definitive date on any potential operation, but the Israeli Prime Minister has said that they will.
Tonight, the spectacular light show across America and the world, the Northern Lights, where they've rarely been seen before. From Maine to California, all the way down to Florida, stunning images painted across the sky. A rare and powerful solar storm sending the Northern Lights down south, and you can still see them tonight.
Whoa, 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 whoa!
We'll tell you who has the best chance of catching the magic. New warning from Israel to Palestinians in Rafah to get out now. Will Israel cross the red line drawn by President Biden not to invade the city? Colleges bracing for chaos at graduations across the country. In 2 cities, students marching to the university president's homes, demanding action. A mother allegedly gunned down by her neighbor, now fighting for her life. Police believe it's because she's white and her children are black. Her son speaking out to us.
And it's heartbreaking, to be honest.
The high cost of owning a home, it's not just mortgage rates, why the price of everything from insurance to repairs is going through the roof.
This is NBC Nightly News with Jose Diaz-Balart.
Good evening, I'm Kristen Welker in for Jose. Something amazing is happening across the skies over America this weekend. We're used to seeing photos of the northern lights from places like Alaska, maybe Montana, but look at this. This was taken last night in Arizona. This one, that was taken in California. Our galaxy is really showing off. A rare and powerful solar storm some 93 million miles away has supercharged the northern lights.
Welcome back. My next guest was once kicked off Elvis Presley's plane at Graceland after she triggered an alarm by sitting on the king's bed. It is a true story, although most people consider her biggest offense bringing me into the world. I'm talking about my mom, Marvelous, Mary Ann Phillip, who makes her debut on the show. Smile at the camera. Let him see it. Put it away. There it is. Bang! You had one job. He's like, when Jimmy introduces you, smile into this camera. Right at me. One job. Congratulations on your TV debut. It is crazy because the way you drive, a lot of people assume you would have been on Cops by now, but you can confirm this is your debut.
Absolutely.
What do you have
I'm
with
so
you? I'm nervous.
excited.
Oh, you are excited. Okay.
I'm very excited.
That makes one of us. I can't. What do you got there? I see it.
Well,
don't dare.
I had to share.
Get out of here. Get out of here. Wow.
And if you've seen him.
This is the time you left. Is there another one? Am I getting a second one?
More like dog than I thought.
Yeah. And my dog's 14th child. What else do you have? All right, he's a prop comic now.
And I would like you to meet Meatball.
Yeah, Meatball the cat. That's a big deal. I have not seen Meatball the cat since probably that picture.
44 years ago.
No, for real. You know, little boys do things to stuffed animals. The ASPCA took this away from me. I'm kidding. Meatball the cat. This is a big deal. Oh, thank you. This is amazing.
He went everywhere, Meatball.
Meatball went a lot of places.
Do you see this face up here?
Yeah.
Jimmy's like, so is Meatball.
Yeah, we had the same type of face, right?
He was trying to imitate him.
No, but he really came everywhere, huh? He even came to Child Protective Services with me. all of the. All right, so let's have this talk then, since you're bringing up my youth. You have 4 wonderful kids, Sujo, Mike, me. They do think I'm the favorite, and I think most historians would argue that I should be. But that being said, I was a problematic little kid. What we want to know is what has concerned you the most during your stories? My behavior in school, my behavior in casinos, or the fashion choices I make on TV?
Oh my goodness, the casino.
Would you say the casino?
Oh my God, it was so much fun.
That doesn't sound like a concern.
No, it was.
Well, here's a true story. If you ever become president, Wesley's political future is done.
It's over.
If Wesley became president, she could be in charge of the Treasury. This is a true story. As my mom, we once made it to a toll booth on I-95 coming home from Foxwoods, so broke that we literally were shaking the rugs out of the car to find change to pay a 35-cent toll. Do you know how much money you have to lose in a casino? That she can't even flash a trucker to get me $1? I mean, it worked the first 4 tolls, but
wait, that's when I become concerned.
Yeah. When the trucker stopped, when you can't even make it as a lot blizzard in Biden's economy.
Come on, Mom, we're going to go to Atlantic City. Atlantic City was good. Next thing you know, we're in Connecticut. We're in Vegas.
Next thing you know, you're like, Jimmy, why are you wearing a blonde wig and powdering your Adam's apple? This is really? Is that you, Caitlin? Give us the Elvis story, because a lot of people have heard this.
Elvis.
They don't know that it's real. We went to Graceland. The panel should know this. Her and my Aunt Fran grew up watching Elvis Presley.
We loved Elvis.
So when we got to Graceland, they have velvet ropes and stuff for people who respect them. Okay? Not everybody does. And you did what?
Oh my goodness, I couldn't wait. We actually went in there and we actually walked by his bed, and I turned around and I looked and I said, is this his bed? And somebody said, yeah. And I'm like,
and like alarms got off.
She's making snow angels and pills. Oh my God.
Yeah, she's like, then we went to the bathroom, we crushed up some powder. I got the full experience. I was like, Mom, don't use the toilet. Don't use the toilet.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews.
Breaking news, a 22-year-old is fatally stabbed in a park in Brisbane South. Also ahead, a large sinkhole opens up during heavy rain in Sydney. All eyes on the Treasurer ahead of Tuesday's budget as pressure mounts to curb the cost of living crisis. Welcome to the show, let everybody know. Switzerland victorious at this year's Eurovision Song Contest, while politics made noise on the sidelines. And Megan Cleary to miss the entire State of Origin series due to a hamstring injury. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Jessica Rendell. A homicide investigation is underway after a man was fatally stabbed in Brisbane South. Reporter Victoria Pengilly has the details.
Police have taped off a playground and a local park area just off Mortimer Road in Acacia Ridge, just south of Brisbane. Officers were called to the scene here just past midnight last night to find a 22-year-old man with critical stab wounds to the chest. He died at the scene. Now, forensics have been combing this area all morning trying to look for clues, but the weather here has really dampened their efforts. The park is right next to a local sports club where hundreds of families have been gathering this morning for a special Mother's Day soccer game. Some of the people we spoke to here this morning said they were shocked to hear something like this could happen in their local area. Here's what a few of them had to say a bit earlier.
pretty devastating, like a local community like this. It's, such a young age to be, murdered, so it's not good at all.
Have you heard of something like this happening?
No, I haven't. Not around here anyway. Yeah, so close to, a precinct like this.
I'm scared to hear that. Very scared. This is my first time. Only people killed in the car, car accident. That's all I know.
Now, officers say the victim was known to the offender and the offender had fled the scene by the time they had arrived. They're appealing to anyone with information or vision to contact officers.
There's been a serious crash on Victoria's Mornington Peninsula, which has left 7 people in hospital with 2 people fighting for life. 2 cars collided on the Nepean Highway at around 9 p.m. last night, with the driver of one vehicle and her 27-year-old male passenger suffering life-threatening injuries. The 37-year-old driver of the other vehicle and 4 of his passengers were taken to hospital, with one in a serious condition. Police are asking anyone with information to come forward. Victorian police say they're treating fires at 3 tobacco stores in Melbourne's north and northwest this weekend as targeted attacks. A crime scene was set up at a tobacco store in Hadfield at 5 o'clock this morning. Less than an hour later, a second store was struck at a shopping centre in Gladstone Park. It follows another suspicious fire at a tobacco shop in Epping yesterday. Police have yet to determine if they're linked to the ongoing tobacco war in Victoria. A large sinkhole has opened up in Sydney's eastern suburbs. Part of Clifftop Road at Dover Heights collapsed during heavy rain last night. It's one of hundreds of jobs the New South Wales SES has responded to over the weekend. Alexander Lewis reports.
This is the end of Ocean View Avenue, or what's left of it. Chunks of road have been swept into the ocean by a raging torrent after the cul-de-sac collapsed. The sinkhole was about 10 metres wide. It opened about 9 o'clock last night. SES volunteers worked until the early hours of the morning, trying to divert water away from homes with sandbags. A waterfall cascaded through Colin Scott's property, flowing past his house and covering the pool area with mud.
It was like a bomb went off. It was just like a thud, and unfortunately most of the water came down to us down below, but the house was shaking.
Today, sand, rocks and pieces of the road surface are strewn down the cliff top, forming a path to the sea. The sinkhole has been cordoned off, and Mr. Scott has lost access to his driveway. He's criticised Waverley Council, accusing it of failing to make adequate repairs after a landslip during heavy rain about a year and a half ago.
So yeah, look, we're just glad we're all safe, but Waverley Council, get off their butt and do something about this.
The ABC has contacted the council for comment. On the other side of Sydney, Warragamba Dam began spilling at 7:30 this morning. The city's main water supply was 98% full before the weekend and reached capacity yesterday afternoon. Water New South Wales says the Warragamba catchment received less rain than forecast, recording 28 millimetres in 48 hours. The SES attended more than 270 incidents in 24 hours, mostly in the southeastern region, for leaking roofs and fallen trees. The rain is forecast to ease this evening as the weather system moves off the coast, but this streak of wet weather isn't over yet, with a medium to high chance of showers forecast in Sydney tomorrow.
The federal budget will be unveiled on Tuesday, with persistent inflation shaping the government's economic approach. Labor wants to help people with the rising cost of living, but needs to be careful it doesn't add to inflationary pressures. The Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, has spoken to our National Affairs Editor, Melissa Clark.
And do you think inflation will be back in the target range? The last media budget update we had suggested that would be 24-25. Is that still the case?
I will have more to say about that between now and the budget, but we do expect the budget, as I said, to put downward pressure on inflation rather than upward pressure on inflation. In every budget, we update all of our forecasts. These are uncertain times to be making forecasts about the economy, but people should expect to see that one of the consequences of our budget is lower inflation rather than higher inflation.
So should we still expect that it is roughly around the same time period, give or take 6 months, 12 months, that we're have inflation back in that 2 to 3% range?
I know people will see it's updated. And as a consequence of the things that we're doing in this budget, as you would expect, and that'll be the difference, frankly, between the Reserve Bank's forecast and our forecast, just an issue of timing. Ours has the budget in it and theirs weren't able to. But speaking about inflation is a good opportunity to remind people that we know people are still pressure, but we have made pretty substantial progress in this inflation fight. It's less than half what its peak was in 2022, but we know we've got more to do, and you'll see that in the budget.
You've talked about preparing for that post-inflation period of trying to drive growth once we get past that, but we know from experience from the Hawke-Keating years that inflation often is very persistent. It's the weed that keeps growing back. Are you being overly optimistic and thinking that the challenge will be done and you can focus on driving economic growth at the end of the forward estimates period?
Oh, look, I'm optimistic about the future of our economy and our country, but there's a really sharp near-term focus on the inflation fight in this budget. It's the most important thing that we can focus on in the near term, but we need to remember that we've got a growth challenge as well, and so we'll invest in the future. The budget will be a responsible budget. It will ease cost of living pressures, and it will invest in a future made in Australia. And we won't be slashing and burning in the budget because we know people are under pressure and the economy is weak. So a focus on inflation, a primary focus on inflation, but not a sole focus.
You've talked about that sharp immediate relief when it comes to cost of living. Obviously, the updated stage 3 tax cuts will be a pretty key part of that. You've only got so much room to move in providing cost of living relief unless you risk accelerating inflation. So at this point, where inflation isn't quite as good as we had thought it might be at this time, would it have been better to have a more targeted income tax cut regime rather than going ahead with one that does cover all income taxpayers, 13 million people? Have you missed an opportunity to give better targeted relief to those who really need it rather than everyone who pays income tax?
Well, no, is the short answer to that. We think that the way that we've redesigned the tax cuts are bang on for the circumstances that we confront. A tax cut for every taxpayer is the foundation stone of the cost of living help in this budget.
Not every taxpayer is doing it really tough right now.
We found other ways as well to provide cost of living help to people who might not be in the tax system, for example, or people who are under pressure, under particular pressure. And so what people can expect to see on Tuesday night, tax cuts for every taxpayer, other help available as well, because we recognise people are under cost of living pressure, and we're able to do that, provide that help, because we are showing such spending restraint and such responsible economic management elsewhere in the budget.
Meanwhile, Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor has told insiders the government is far from pushing inflation down and that the focus needs to be on enabling the economy to grow at a faster rate than spending.
The key thing is to get those fiscal rules back in place. Okay, so and they have been in place. It's really important to emphasise this. They have been in place since Peter Costello. It's only the current Labor government that took them out. Well, they did it because they love to spend at exactly the time when we need restraint. Because if Australian households are struggling with their budgets and showing restraint in their budgets, it's time for the Australian government to show restraint.
Let's talk about restraint then. Yesterday, the government announced more than $11 billion new housing funding. The coalition criticised it because it had no new money. Does the coalition want to spend more?
No, the point here is that the government committed or promised there'd be 1.2 million houses being built. There is nothing in any of what it was announced yesterday that tells us we're going to get any closer to that target. And their own National Housing Supply Council has said they're going to fall short of 1 million at best. And many commentators, no, they should just get back to basics. Here's the point. If you want more manufacturing in Australia, which we all want, if you want more housing in Australia, you've got to get back to basics. So what are the basics that you've got to get right? You've got to get energy policy right. You've got to make sure there's more supply coming into the market to put downward pressure on prices. You've got to make sure you get your industrial relations right, David, which ensures that we've got productive, competitive workplaces, which are good for both employees and employers. You've got to make sure that government's not getting in the way. You're not over-regulating things. You're getting approvals done, not blocking approvals. These are the basics. If you don't get the basics right, you try to veneer over it with loads of government spending, and it fails.
On defence, the Shadow Defence Minister Andrew Hastie says the coalition will spend more than Labor. Is that right?
Well, I make the historical observation that coalition governments have always been able to stay within those fiscal rules that I just described, and at the same time deliver a strong outcome for defence. And that's something that we need going into the future. There's no question about that. Look, the geopolitics we're facing right now, there's no doubt, they're very different from even a few years ago. Well, we'll make sure defence gets the capability and resources it needs. We're deeply concerned about whether that's going on.
That's a little bit short of what Andrew Hastie saying.
Well, I'm not going to give you the.
Join me every weekend here on France 24 for World Roundup.
Hello and welcome to Daybreak here on France 24. We'll be with you until 10 a.m. Paris time. These are this morning's main news headlines. Fireworks protests and a Dutch exclusion following a week overshadowed by the participation of Israel in the competition. Switzerland wins the Eurovision Song Contest. Residents pile water tanks, mattresses and other belongings onto vehicles as tens of thousands of Palestinians are forced to move once more as Israel prepares to expand its military operation in the southern Gazan city of Rafah. And as Russia says it's captured 5 villages in northeastern Ukraine, at least 3 people have been killed in a missile strike on a restaurant in Donetsk, with 5 others wounded. Good to have you with us first this hour. Following days of controversy over Israel's participation in the competition, Switzerland has won the Eurovision Song Contest. Singer Nemo enters the history books as the first artist identifying as non-binary to claim victory. The 24-year-old's entry, The Code, took the highest score from the jury vote and enough of the popular ballots to receive nearly 600 points, edging out Croatia and France.
This was one of the most queer representations we've seen at Eurovision, which is like amazing. I want to shout out all the other queer artists this year. Like, give it up for everyone. To know that a song that has changed my life and a song where I just speak about my story has touched so many people and maybe inspired other people to stay true to their story is the most insane thing that has ever happened to me.
The contest itself was rattled earlier on Saturday by the disqualification of Dutch contestant Joost Klein following a backstage incident. While outside the arena in the Swedish city of Malmö, police pushed back protesters and used pepper spray to clear crowds. The participation of Israel in the competition sparked fierce debate in the run-up to the event. Both cheers and boos could be heard from the audience during the performance of the Israeli contestant Aidan Golan. Meanwhile, Israel has been continuing to pound parts of Gaza, including Rafah, where it expanded an evacuation order early on Saturday, as the UN warned that an outright invasion of the crowded southern city risked an epic disaster. Airstrikes have been reported across the coastal territory again overnight, killing at least 21 people in central Gaza. The evacuation order issued by the Israeli military is forcing tens of thousands more people to leave eastern Rafah in defiance of growing pressure from close ally, the United States and others. Within Israel, tens of thousands of people attended the now weekly anti-government protests in Tel Aviv on Saturday amid mounting pressure on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and ongoing demands for him to resign. This latest rally came after yet another round of ceasefire talks ended in Cairo earlier this week without a breakthrough after Israel rejected a deal that Hamas said it had accepted. Mediators have so far failed to reach a truce deal despite repeated rounds of indirect negotiations. The latest protests in Tel Aviv came hours after Hamas claimed in a video that an Israeli-British hostage who'd been held in captivity in Gaza had died from wounds sustained during an Israeli airstrike. The militant group released footage which appeared to show the 51-year-old speaking at an earlier date under duress. Hamas claimed he'd been injured in an airstrike last month and died on Saturday. Jenny Shin has more.
This video was posted on the Telegram network. It stayed unspecified. We see a man with a bruise on his right eye. Standing against a white wall, he introduces himself as 51-year-old Nadav Popplewell. In a second video, the armed wing of Hamas announces his death, saying Popplewell succumbed to his wounds sustained a month ago in an Israeli airstrike. The Families Forum, an association representing some of the families of the hostages, reacted to the news.
Every sign of life received from the hostages held by Hamas is another cry of distress to the Israeli government and its leaders. We don't have a moment to spare. You must strive to implement a deal that will bring them all back today, the living to rehabilitation and the murdered to burial. The Israeli-British Popplewell was kidnapped on October 7th from his home in the Nirim kibbutz, along with his mother, who was released during the truce last November. With negotiations at an impasse, families of the remaining hostages say Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has forsaken their loved ones.
He is abandoning our families to their death for his own political interests. Entering Rafah and expanding the operations there are both hinder the hostages release negotiation and put the hostages' lives in grave danger.
Of the 252 people kidnapped on October 7th, 128 remain detained in Gaza, according to Israeli accounts. At least 36 of them have been declared dead.
The US president says it's now up to Hamas to make the next move. Speaking at a fundraising event outside Seattle, Joe Biden said a ceasefire in the war would be possible as soon as tomorrow if the militant group released the remaining hostages from Gaza. Earlier in the week, Joe Biden had warned Israel that Washington would stop supplying artillery shells and other weapons if it went ahead with its planned attack on Rafah. Moving on to other world news, it comes as Russia pushes on with its renewed ground assault in northeastern Ukraine. Moscow says it's captured another 5 villages which lie in a contested grey zone in the border of Ukraine's Kharkiv region and Russia. There's been no confirmation from Kyiv and fighting is ongoing. Journalists in the city of Votchansk say multiple buildings have been destroyed there following Russian airstrikes and rocket barrages. Liam McGuinn has the details.
These residents in the Kharkiv region frantically pack their bags and leave their homes. They're fleeing a Russian offensive in the region. According to the Kremlin, it was a successful push. On Saturday, the Russian Defense Ministry said that they had captured several Ukrainian villages in the region. It's a claim the governor of Kharkiv rejects. He says the fighting is ongoing.
The enemy is trying to advance deep into our territory. Active fighting is taking place in 3 separate villages. The gray zone hasn't grown for the time being. The front line has been stabilized for now. Indeed, fierce fighting is taking place for the 3 villages I mentioned before. We will observe and trust in the capabilities of the Ukrainian armed forces.
The 3 villages in question are Pilna, Streletsha, Borisivka, all situated on the Russian border. While they don't hold much strategic importance, victory would be a significant boost for Russian forces. Meanwhile, 300 kilometers south in Donetsk, a handful were killed and dozen injured as Ukrainian missiles struck a busy restaurant on Saturday.
There was an attack from the Ukrainian military aimed at a strictly civilian sector in central Donetsk. At the site of shelling, the military investigators have found the remains of missiles that will be sent for further investigations.
The attacks took place on the 10-year anniversary of the city falling under Russian control. Donetsk regularly came under Ukrainian shelling in the immediate aftermath of the Russian invasion in 2022.
A missile strike has killed 3 people at a restaurant in Donetsk in eastern Ukraine. Officials there said there had been 2 strikes by precision rocket launchers which hit the restaurant and also damaged the roof of a partially constructed building nearby. Separately, the governor of Russia's Belgorod region, which borders Ukraine, said on Saturday that 1 woman had been killed and 29 people wounded, including a child, in shelling by Ukrainian armed forces. Moving on to other world news, tens of thousands of Georgians marched through the streets of Tbilisi to protest a controversial bill that would prevent the country from entering the EU. It's called the Foreign Agents Bill, but critics describe it as the Russian bill. Kamila has more.
In the streets of Tbilisi, the Georgian and European flags are held side by side. Around 50,000 protesters took part in a march to express their opposition to a so-called Foreign Agents Bill that they say is inspired by a Russian equivalent used to clamp down on dissent.
We want to withdraw this Russian law. We want to enter European Union with our proud nation and with our dignity.
The EU has made it clear the bill would harm Tbilisi's ambitions of joining the bloc.
We don't want to be part of Russia. We never wanted to be part of Russia, and it has always been and always will be our goal to be part of Europe, to have European values, and to be free.
The bill would require organisations receiving 20% of their funding from abroad to register as agents of foreign influence. Critics say it mirrors a repressive Russian law and targets non-profit organisations as well as independent media. Georgia was granted EU candidate status last December, and polls suggest about 80% of the population is in favour of joining. The country has been rocked by weeks of protest over the draft legislation, a crisis that has pitted the Georgian Dream ruling party against a coalition of opposition parties, civil society and the country's figurehead president. Saturday's protest came a day after Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobahidze said the government would push ahead with its plans, despite opposition from what he called misled youngsters who feel resentment towards Russia. Georgian Dream wants the law enacted by the end of the month.
Well, with more on whether it's too late for the government to change course, we spoke last night with Regis Jont from our sister channel, RFI.
I think indeed the government is showing since 3 weeks that he wants absolutely whatever the cost is to adopt that law, and this is what he says, and it is much more prepared than it was a year ago. So he did a lot for that, and we can see that. But in the meantime, he's facing more and more people in the street. If 1 year ago, in March 2023, about 30,000 people managed to make the government taking back its text, its law, its bill. This year, we saw up to 80,000 people in the street, 50,000 today, and we can expect in the coming days to have more people, more than 100,000, which is huge in this small country, which is 3.7 million. So it's really significant. And now the real question is indeed if this likely 100,000 people in the street will be able to push the government to withdraw its text.
More than 300 people are now known to have died in flash flooding that ripped through several provinces in Afghanistan as Taliban authorities declared a state of emergency and rushed to rescue the injured. Jenny Tin has more.
Trudging through the mud, these Afghans clean the streets as best they can after flash floods swept through the province of Baghlan.
It was 1:30 p.m. local time. We'd finished Friday prayers and were walking towards our homes, and suddenly the flood started. We didn't have enough time to reach our homes. The flood took us by surprise, and people lost their loved ones and their homes.
Thousands of homes have been destroyed or damaged in this northern region alone, with the provinces of Badakhshan in the northeast, Central Ghor and Western Herat also affected, inflicting a heavy financial toll on its residents. Many have been left homeless, with transportation, water and waste systems severely disrupted.
All resources will be available as quickly as possible for rescue operations, evacuation of the deceased, and medical treatment of the injured. We also urge our fellow citizens to assist the victims affected by this natural disaster.
Since mid-April, floods have killed about 100 people across 10 Afghan provinces, with no region entirely spared. Afghanistan is one of the most ill-prepared countries in the world for climate-related disasters, particularly vulnerable as 80% of the more than 40 million people depend on agriculture for their livelihoods.
It's time now for our focus report. This morning we turn to Germany and the role of women in the labor force there, which...
This is Asia Now.
Good afternoon, it's 4 p.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 9:30 in New Delhi and 11 o'clock in Jakarta. I'm Milakya Silverati, headlines this hour. More than 100,000 Palestinians flee Rafah after Israeli expands an evacuation order. In a further indication, the military is pressing ahead with its plans for a ground attack. Fierce fighting on the fringes of Ukraine's northeastern Kharkiv region amid a renewed Russian push. Ukraine says it is pushing back against assaults and battling for control of territory. At least 11 killed and dozens more injured after a bus carrying school students crashed on Indonesia's West Java province. Israel has ordered tens of thousands of Palestinians to further evacuate eastern Rafah as it intensifies its assault in southern Gaza. The sound of explosions reverberated out of Rafah as smoke rose over the city. It's a further indication that the military is pressing ahead with its plans for a ground attack on Gaza's southern city. Israel says about 300,000 people have fled eastern Rafah since evacuation orders were given this week, but some say they were unable to evacuate despite the warnings. And those who have fled moved towards the humanitarian area in Al-Bawasi, but aid groups and UN officials have warned that the area was already overcrowded. The Israeli military has also called on residents and displaced people in the Jabalia area of northern Gaza to clear out, saying it was returning to operate there after it noticed Hamas trying to re-establish its control of the area. And despite heavy US pressure, Israel said it will proceed with an incursion into Rafah, where more than 1 million displaced people have sought refuge during the 7-month-old war. US President Joe Biden says a ceasefire is possible tomorrow if the militant group releases its hostages. Mr. Biden earlier this week had warned Israel that he would stop supplying weapons if Israeli forces attack the city of Rafah. Protests across the world are ramping up. Pro-Palestinian demonstrators in the Eurovision Song Contest jeered and booed as Israel's contestant performed. And earlier in the day, thousands marched through Sweden's third-largest city to protest Israel's participation in the contest. Fierce battles ongoing in Ukraine's northeastern Kharkiv region as the country's troops counterattacked after Russia launched an incursion into the region late on Friday.
Сьогодні увага передусім фронту, ситуація в тих наших районах, де зараз найбільше ризиків російських наступальних дій. Наші оборонні операції тривають на Харківщині, в районі сіл Стрілеча, Красне, Мороховець, Олійниково, Лук'янці, Гатище, Плетенівка – це прикордонні села. Наші війська вже другу добу ведуть там контрударні дії, захищаючи українську територію.
Moscow said it captured 5 villages in Kharkiv, while Kiev maintains it is repulsing the attacks and fighting for control of the settlements. The latest incursion opens a new front, which could be the start of a broader push into the Kharkiv region or draw away overstretched Ukrainian forces from the east, where the Russian offensive has been focused. The war had previously been largely confined to the east and south. Ukrainian President Zelensky said the southern Donetsk region remained especially tense, and Kyiv has been on the back foot on the battlefield for months as it struggles with delays in Western aid and manpower shortages. A bus accident in Indonesia's West Java province has left at least 11 dead and 40 others injured. The bus was carrying more than 60 high school students on a graduation trip. It was on its way from the Java island town of Depok to Lambang, a popular tourist spot, when it crashed last night. The bus lost control and tilted, hitting a car and 3 motorbikes. The police said 9 of the dead were students and one of them was a teacher. The accident also killed a motorcyclist. Police are investigating the cause of the accident. The local traffic police chief told local media that he suspected the brakes of the bus malfunctioned before the crash. Deadly traffic accidents are common in Indonesia, where vehicles are often old or poorly maintained and road rules are routinely ignored. Coming up on Asia Now, escalating tensions in the South China Sea. Manila sends ships to disputed waters in the region, accusing Beijing of building an artificial island. And later, hundreds feared dead after devastating floods caused by torrential rains hit Afghanistan as well as Brazil.
The first UN Civil Society Conference in Africa ended in Nairobi on Friday, with calls for government and civil society to have open and sincere discussions to advance a shared vision for stronger multilateralism and a better future for everyone.
Today, we are entangled in crisis. Sustainable development is under threat. Conflicts are erupting with alarming frequency and horrifying results. Inequality and poverty are tearing societies apart. Many developing countries are being suffocated by debt and the cost of living crisis. Climate chaos is knocking communities off their feet, with the poorest suffering the most. And new technologies, particularly artificial intelligence, are creating new threats while fueling old bigotries and divisions. These crises demand international solutions, but the international system is not up to the task. I urge all participants to deeply reflect on how we can translate the outcomes of our discussions into transformative and actionable results. We envision development aligned with the spirit and vision of the summit, emphasizing inclusive and impactful agenda that amplify the voices and agency of women and youth, empowering them to take initiatives that make a difference for the present and for the future.
Both leaders praised the effort of the civil society and underscored their indispensable contributions. Pope Francis expressed concern on Saturday for the planet in flames because of wars during his meeting with the participants of #BeHuman, the World Meeting on Human Fraternity that brings together 30 Nobel Prize laureates and top figures from international bodies at the Vatican for a dialogue on peace. War is a deception. War is always a defeat, as is the idea of international security based on deterrent of fear. It is another deception. To ensure lasting peace, we must return to a recognition of our common humanity and place fraternity at the center of lives. Only in this way will we succeed in developing a model of coexistence capable of giving the human family a future. Political peace needs peace of hearts, so that people meet in the confidence that life always triumphs over all forms of death. The two-day meeting has been organized by the Fratelli Tutti Foundation and will consist of 12 thematic tables set up in different locations in Rome.
Flash floods in northern Afghanistan have killed hundreds of people, the Taliban authorities said on Saturday, without giving a more precise figure. The seasonal rains have inundated the province of Baghlan the worst, but people in 3 other provinces, Ghor, Herat and Takhar, have also been hit. The Taliban's chief spokesman said that many people have also been injured and that a rescue effort is underway. Zabihullah Mujahid said many houses have also been destroyed, which has resulted in significant financial losses for many people.
Get all the international and African news on africanews.com.
The city of Johannesburg and its entities are liable for the deaths of 76 people in a building fire, a report has found. The nighttime fire at the 5-story building in downtown Johannesburg in August last year was one of South Africa's worst disasters. Retired Judge Cici Hampempe was put in charge of the inquiry, which began in October. She delivered the first part of her report on Sunday and concluded that the city of Joburg, which owns the building, had shown total disregard for its calamitous state. Judge Hampempe recommended that disciplinary action be taken against the chief executive officer of the Johannesburg Property Company, which oversees the city's buildings. She also said that the building should be demolished. There was a stunning development at the inquiry in January when a man due to testify as a resident confessed that he had started the fire to burn the body of a man he had killed on the orders of a drug dealer. The disaster shed light on Johannesburg's housing crisis and the city's illegal landlords who rent out space to people desperate for somewhere to live.
Mozambique's ruling party, the Mozambique Liberation Front, or Frelimo, has named a new leader. President Filipe Nyusi made the announcement on Sunday, dismissing speculation that he would stand a third time, despite the constitution limiting a president to 2 5-year terms. This means that relatively unknown Daniel Chapo will be his presidential candidate in elections scheduled to take place in October. Frelimo has been in power since the country gained independence from Portugal in 1975 and hopes Chapo will help extend its rule. His appointment came as a surprise. Chapo has not served in the national cabinet and his name was not on most lists of potential candidates. The 47-year-old law graduate and former radio announcer was appointed provincial governor in 2016. Before that, he taught constitutional law and political science.
Kenyan President William Ruto has made significant pledges in response to the devastating floods in Nairobi, promising emergency financial aid and reconstruction efforts. He outlined long-term solutions to prevent future flooding disasters. Speaking during a visit that affected areas of the capital's dense informal settlement, Ruto pledged to give each family 10,000 shillings and vowed to rebuild all schools destroyed by the floods. I will announce the construction of 20,000 houses that will help people of Nairobi living in informal settlements like this one. This will see every citizen living in dignified settlements with water, electricity, clean water, clean environment, so that citizens stop living in houses like these ones here that are swept away by floods all the time. Ruto has postponed the planned reopening of schools this week until further notice, as heavy rains and flood have killed more than 200 people continue. The Kenyan government has set aside 1 billion Kenyan shillings to rebuild all the schools affected by floods. Before reopening of schools, all children in Nairobi and everywhere else in the country can go back to proper structures that they can learn in. Kenya and other parts of East Africa have been overwhelmed by flooding, with more than 150,000 displaced people living in camps across the country.
Thank
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.